So we'll start over here again where we were holding in Perek Chav Beis. So we were saying, like I say, the message of Chav Aleph is, the message of Perek Chav Aleph is that deals with the way it is from Hashem's perspective. From Hashem's perspective, Hashem Hu Elikim, Eined Milvadei. In other words, that's the emes. The emes is the way Hashem looks at it. Like we said before, that the teacher, excuse me, the teacher never, even when he has to convey the message to a child, to a student, and he has to use certain parables which are presented as stories, an example, still doesn't become a storyteller. He's still the intellectual teacher, right? This is what we said. It's from the perspective of the child, the other side of the coin, initially, till he realizes the message. He thinks it's a story which is presented to him. He looks at the parable, and via the parable, eventually he will start understanding the concept, what it is. So in Perek Chav Beis deals the way Hashem truly spoke creation. In other words, with the deficiencies or let's call it the negative dimensions of speech in the context of the concealment of the godly reality which produces speech, like we said by man, that in order to speak you have to condense your inner kochot in order to speak. The whole formation of speak is about tzimtzum. So similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that Hashem, the way Hashem created the world was ultimately through Dibur. And Dibur means ribui tzimtzumim sheinim mishunim. Each one is another cover-up on the reality of Hashem. And to the extent which is produced is not only something which is neutral, but it could go to such an extent that what is the ultimate production could be something which is neged Hashem, contrary to the Ratzon Hashem, and to the extent this is something which is to'avat Hashem hashasani, something which Hashem abhors, something which Hashem is disgusted with, something Hashem hates. So why did He create it? So this is where we left off last week, and everybody again could see the classes the previous week on this, namely on this koshertube.com, but with the text on tanyaonline.com. So we left up that the whole point is to give the man freedom of choice, right? Remember you mentioned it as well. If you remember, you mentioned it, and kidei lahanish l'rashaim, to punish the wicked and to give a good reward to the tzaddik, to the righteous person. This is where we left off. V'zeh nikra. Does everybody have it? It's on the pages which we gave out. It's 1, 2. V'zeh nikra. Hold on. Here. V'zeh nikra. It's actually the first page. When you turn the first one, it's on the second. Here. Turn one. You want to turn one. It's on the second page, right over here. No, not behind it. The second one, the third. In other words, yeah. V'zeh nikra. B'chinas achiraim. Excuse me.
The page is numbered. You know? The page is numbered. It'll be simpler to
say?
If you have the pages numbered, I'm saying.
Yeah, if you have the pages numbered. Tanya.
Sure.
So it's called V'zeh nikra b'chinas achiraim. The Ratzon, and you see it's on the third page over here if you want to grab it. V'zeh nikra b'chinas achiraim, which is on the page. It's on the page. I actually put it to the right page. It's in the middle of the page. In the Hebrew text, it's V'zeh nikra, and on the it's actually pretty much of the last quarter. This is called hinder part. This is a supernal will. Do you see that? Now if you turn one, right there on that page, it says, and this is called the hinder part of the supernal will. You see that? It's a third. It's the quarter off the bottom. Now you can read wherever you want, but I'm just saying where we're holding. This is called. So, as he said, so what's the point? Why did Hashem conceal Himself to such a degree that what could be produced is energy and forces which is contrary to the Ratzon Hashem? We gave the example last week, for example, an apple is produced from the Achdus Hashem. It's an infinite difference, or an infinite. You need so many tzimtzumim, concealments and contractions of the Eir HaBilti Balvul, and the infinite light from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for an apple to be created. Apple's a finite creation from an infinite creator. So that is something which that itself tells us how many levels of concealments there could have been, that from an infinite creator could be created an apple. But we said an apple is still really not, you don't see the enormous tzimtzum of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because at the end of the day, an apple could be elevated to Kedusha. A person could make a bracha on an apple, and a person could take the energy of the apple and learn a part of Torah. The real question, or where do you see the intensity of its tzimtzum, the intensity of Hashem's contraction on His infinite light, is when you see that what is produced is something which is not only neutral, but something which is an opposition force to the oneness of God. An opposition energy, like we said last year, the Yetzer Hara, I think you mentioned it.
It can only be on a human being. That's the only.
But even something which is, like we said the other day, so a non-kosher piece of meat. Where does it get its energy from? It gets its energy, like we said, it's not like evil in itself. No kosher piece of meat. It's only evil. It's only. I mean, a goy can eat it, and it's not. There's nothing negative about it. But what we mentioned, we spoke about this last week. I think you mentioned it last week as well. In the end of the day, when Hashem says not to eat something, it's not something just external, extrinsic. It's an intrinsic impurity. Hashem didn't say, just like we said, just stop by a particular.
It's only applicable to Jews.
It does, true. It's only applicable to Jews. But Hashem, that itself says, the fact that a Jew cannot take this piece of meat and make a bracha on it and use its energy to do a mitzvah or to learn Torah, that itself says that it's associated with impurity. When Hashem says, do not engage or connect with that level of impurity. So it's not only the Yetzer Hara, which is really the driving force within a person to do contrary to the Ratzon Hashem, which that itself says again is a great demonstration of a tzimtzum, such a contraction, such a concealment of Hashem's oneness, that a Yetzer Hara could be produced. But again, it's the Yetzer Hara, or it's anything which is associated with loisase, what Hashem says stay away from. The reason why Hashem says stay away from it is because it's intrinsically impure. What does mean intrinsically? It's connected to impure forces. So Hashem allowed, eventually the tzimtzumim were so intense that even impure forces were created from Hashem. And obviously everything comes from Hashem. There's nothing independent to say, well, here's God and here's the negative force. There's nothing independent of Hashem. So ultimately everything is an extension of God. And the question is, why did Hashem conceal Himself to such a degree that impure forces would be created? Answer: there should be bechira chavshis. There should be freedom of choice, because Hashem wants to give reward to the righteous. You cannot give reward to the righteous if the righteous is programmed only to do good. The reward to a neshama down here in this world, when it does its service and learns Torah and it does mitzvahs, as an example, right, is much greater than the reward to an angel. Even though an angel on the surface seems to me holier, right, angelic, it's an angel. He's holy. There's no impurity. He doesn't have any. He can't engage in impurity because he doesn't have Yetzer Hara. So one's going to say, oh, his reward is so much greater, because man, even though he's doing the right things, but he's always vulnerable, because he finds himself in a world which is associated with in a world that does not demonstrate godliness, and quite on the contrary, a world which on the surface seems to oppose godliness. I say on the surface because ultimately, the world also, like you said the other day, I think it was yourself as well, you said about even the Yetzer Hara ultimately wants that we should not listen to him, right? But on the surface, the Yetzer Hara is saying a different message than Hashem Echad and the oneness of Hashem. The world is not demonstrated, and we don't clearly on the surface see the demonstration of Hashem Echad via the Olam, via the world. Quite on the contrary. The Olam, the world itself, the word Olam is from the expression of Hel and Behester, a concealment over the reality of God. Right? So, I'm sorry?
So the multiplicity.
Yeah, so what, right? And more than the multiplicity, energy which seems to contradict the oneness of Hashem on the surface. And so someone's going to say, therefore, maybe the angel should get more reward, but the answer is just the opposite. The angel is programmed to do good. The angel only exists in a spiritual, godly domain and godly reality, while the neshama is placed in a body and placed in this physical world where he has challenges. And he overcomes the challenges, right? He or she overcomes the challenges, learns Torah, does mitzvahs, and then aligns himself with Ratzon Hashem. Hashem is ready to give the tzaddik, this righteous Jew or this righteous person, true reward. Why is there reward? Because there's the opposite force. And that's the reason why Hashem allows something to emanate, to evolve from Him Himself, that He Himself hates and abhors. Why did He create it? There should be a balance between the good and the evil, and the righteous should come and choose the evil. Hashem says, you chose the evil, I have so much reward for you. And similarly, to punish, in other words, to reprimand the Rasha. Because he chose the Rasha chose evil. It was a freedom of his choice. And he goes, and which is again that they subdue the sitrach. This is what we're holding in the text. It's the about face of God's desire. As we said the other day, when we say about face, what's the definition of about face? Remember we spoke about this last week as well, that when you want to give something, you're compelled to give something right to someone who you don't like, who you hate. You throw it over your shoulder and you walk away because you can't look at the person in the face. And the same thing, the energy is coming from God. There's no other energy. There's no other independent energy. It's coming from God. But how is God providing this energy to this impure forces? In an about face manner. That's why they're called Elikim Acherim. Elihim, actually, you could say Elihim Acherim, which means it's an energy, but it comes Acherim because it comes about face from God, because God is providing this energy in a way that He Himself is disgusted with this whole force. He doesn't like it. He abhors them because it's ultimately Tumah, and Hashem is all about Kedusha. And that's why they're called Acheiraim Ratznel. So the Ratzon Ha'elyon continues. When you're dealing with the supreme desire, the supreme will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the inwardness of Hashem. And again, we said Panim also has the translation, the connotation of Pnimiyut. And we really said they're interconnected because in the face you could see the Pnimiyut of the person. So the Panim, the inwardness, the face of Hashem, which is Mekeir HaChaim and Mechayes Kol Elamis, which is the source of life, which vivifies and vitalizes all worlds. That is Ratzon Ha'elyon. It doesn't dwell upon the Sitra Achra. It provides the Sitra Achra, but it doesn't dwell in the Sitra Achra. Remember, for example, look at the famous pasuk. It says, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'seicham." It says, "Va'asuli mikdash." Hashem said, make me a mikdash, make me a holy place, a holy domain, the tabernacle. In the end, the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. Hashem said, "V'shachanti b'seicham." I will dwell in it. I'm comfortable there. Sheira, Shechina Sheira among Jews or in the Beis Hamikdash, because Hashem is Kedusha, Hashem is about sanctity. You create a edifice which is about sanctity, Hashem feels good there. On Sitra Achra, on Klippa, on the impure forces, Hashem is not Sheira. He doesn't dwell there. He provides them, but He's not dwelling there. He's not comfortable there. And he says more so, even the hinder part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in other words, the about face energy, or the energy, better yet said, the energy which comes from the about face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which it has to be a strong and potent energy because it's coming from God. Even that which comes from the about face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu also does not dwell in them. Makif alem amayla. It hovers over them. Hovers over them, meaning to say that even, it's like a next step of distance. Even when I turn about face, the energy which comes from the about face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu also doesn't dwell, doesn't feel good to invest, to get involved. No, makif, it hovers. It kind of like hovers, meaning to say that the connection between the energy and the Sitra Achra is even more distant by two levels. One, it's about face, and also it doesn't enter in them that they should feel, or that's why they don't align themselves with the godly reality. Imagine someone is supporting you for 20 years. and then you meet him on the street and say, who are you? Or you meet him on the street and say, get out of my way. He's giving you everything you need for 20 years. But he gave it to you, or he turned about face, or he sent somebody, because he can't look at your face. And even when he sent somebody, the other person made sure to give it to you in a way that you don't have no idea where it's coming from. Not only when about face, you could always still identify who the one who gave it to you about face. So you could say, he didn't like me because look at my face, but I still know who it's coming from. But there could be different levels of distance. It could be about face, or it could be someone else taking the energy and making sure that the one where it's coming from is completely concealed from this whole process, this whole giving. So in the end, this guy could provide you for so many years. You can meet him on the street and say, could you get out of my way? And that's what the Sitra Achra is doing. It's telling God, get out of my way. Where are you receiving your energy? From God. Why don't you appreciate it? Because God doesn't give it to me in a person with a personal touch. God doesn't look at the Sitra Achra in its face and say, I want to give it to you. Because God does not want to provide. He only provides the Sitra Achra because there's a kavanah alien, there's a supreme intention. Hashem has a kavanah because He wants freedom of choice, and He wants to give reward to the righteous. But personally, He can't look at the Sitra Achra in the face because that's impurity, and Hashem is about purity. Hashem is about kedusha. Hashem is about sanctity. And to the extent that even when Hashem gives about face, He doesn't give it in a pnimiyut that they should sensitize, they should feel the godliness. No, makif, it hovers over them, and therefore they kind of tell God, get out of my way. I don't want to identify with you. And not only that, they would persuade a Jew, which is again the forces where the Yetzer Hara comes from, or anything which is impure comes from, to persuade the Jew to do contrary to the Ratzon Hashem. Imagine they're receiving their energy only, they don't have any independent energy. But because the energy comes in such a way, in such a distant fashion, in a way that Hashem distanced Himself from them, and the only reason Hashem distanced from Himself because He cannot stand them. So they take God's energy, but they do not identify it with the Almighty, with Hashem, and therefore they oppose Hashem. And that's what He says. Therefore, impurity is a place of death, and impurity is a place, or in other words, Sitra Achra, Klipa, is a place of death and a place of impurity. Hashem Yishmereinu, shall God save us and help us, and guard us from any influence, any connection to any impurity. Because the little bit of light and energy which it nourishes and it receives from about face, from above, it ends up being in exile in it. What does it mean? This is the whole idea of Galus Hashchina. What is Galus Hashchina? We say the Shechina is in Galus. Galus means literally exile. And if you want to break it down, we gave this mashal the other day as well. We had this expression. When you say someone is incarcerated, it's in a place you don't want to be. When you're in your home, you appreciate being there. For that matter, a person appreciates his home more than any other place, because any other place he's conforming to that place. He's always adjusting to the work atmosphere, to the street atmosphere, to friendship atmosphere, to class atmosphere. At home is where you are. You appreciate home. A person comes home, takes off his shoes, sits down, and goes, this is where I feel good. And therefore, you could many times identify the person's home, or the person would identify his home with himself. You go to someone's home, you could identify what kind of people live in the home, because the home is a place where the person expresses himself. Sometimes you could even identify the character of man in his home, because that's where, the home is a place where I like to be, therefore the home can resemble me. When a person is incarcerated, in jail, every second he's there, he doesn't want to be there. So he's there, he sleeps there, he eats there, but he hates being there so much that the place and the person are disconnected, despite Achman al-Itzlan. God forbid, we should never know, but no good person should ever know about this, but a person could be in jail 10 years. But the place doesn't resemble him, because every moment he doesn't want to be there. He wants to be away from those four walls. So therefore his expression doesn't come to fruition in those four walls, because he's somewhere else. So when Hashem is in the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem is in Eretz Yisrael, when we had redemption, or when the Beis Hamikdash was built, Yerushalayim, Hashem felt good. And therefore Hashem felt good. The place resembled or reflected Hashem's infinity. The place reflected Hashem's kindness. You walked into the Beis Hamikdash, and any given day, you saw with your own eyes miracles. Because Hashem essentially is not confined to nature. Hashem is not limited to nature. Hashem transcends. Hashem created nature. He wants things to run naturally, but Hashem is beyond nature. Hashem is all about miracle. In other words, the kochot of Hashem, the infinity of Hashem is expressed through miracle. So when you walk into the Beis Hamikdash, when Hashem said, Beis C, this is my home, so it reflected God. And any given day, you walk into the Beis Hamikdash, you saw many miracles. And in good times, times Shlomo HaMelech, this goodness and grace and kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was manifest in the entire place where Jews live, particularly in Eretz Yisrael under the rulership of Shlomo HaMelech. Because the godly reality was manifest because Hashem felt good there. In exile, Hashem is there, but He doesn't feel good about it. He doesn't feel good about it because exile is about an energy which stands in contrast to the Kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So He's there because there's no other place which could vitalize even Galus. But Galus doesn't reflect God. So the Galus where Hashem is could stand in opposition to the God which is right now giving it its own energy. For example, you think about even physical sorrows, physical pain. When Jews suffer, God's not there, God forbid. God forbid. Like someone said, remember when I was a kid in grade 7 at a Rebbe, interesting Rebbe. He was a very a big guy and a big Talmud Chacham, but he always used to say when he was a survivor of the Holocaust. So he said when he came to America, he said people used to say, well, God was forming the new America, so He just turned away from Europe, and therefore people did what they did. And therefore Europe turned into this chaotic continent. It's just silly. I mean, remember he used to mention this time and again. I remind myself. He passed away a few years ago. All of us shalom. But he always when Jews collectively suffer, even individuals suffers. God is right there, but God's suffering together with a person. This is physical suffering, but the void of spirituality, which is again the whole idea of galus. Hashem is everywhere. There's no place. There's no place which is devoid of God. But it's similar to say someone is in prison. Well, he's there 10, 15 years. Isn't he comfortable there? Doesn't that place become his home? No, it never became his home. A person could sit in prison, chas v'shalom, 30 years. God forbid, theoretically speaking, it should never manifest. But a person, it never became his home. He's there, and every second he doesn't want to be there. There's no domain which is devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if it's impure, Hashem hates it. And the reason why Hashem went into Galus is because it says, I don't want to talk about negative against the Yid, but that's what ultimately orchestrated Galus, that because we sinned, so we kind of removed the godly reality, so Galus was created, and it becomes a state of Galus. But unfortunately, we're in the Galus, and again, when there's Galus, many things can go wrong. There's a whole package that comes together with Galus, but the main thing is that Hashem is there. Again, when in physical suffering, but in this context, more as spiritual, devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hashem is there. But it's Galus. The place does not reflect God. It's not His home. On the contrary, every moment God does not want to be there. That's the phenomenon of Galus HaShechina. So, what is the Galus? In this case, the Galus is the impure energy which kind of imprisons God's energy. It takes God's energy because it has no independent kiyum. It doesn't have independent existence. It's this whole existent independent God. So it's nourishing God's energy, but it's not identifying with God's energy. So it remains impure because God's energy is removed from it. So it's nourishing from God's energy, but God himself doesn't want to identify with this impurity. So the impurity consequently is not identified with God. So that's the galus. It's taking God's energy and putting this wall around it. I'm going to live from you, I'm going to exist from you, but it's not going to be about you. Poor Shechina. It's vitalizing something which does not want to identify with it. And it works two ways. The Shechina itself doesn't want to identify it because it's impure. So it's giving it, like I said, with so many different levels of concealment behind about face, and even this, the energy which comes about face just hovers over it. But consequently, or together, simultaneous with that, or together with that, the klipa remains a klipa. It does not want to identify with the God which is right now providing it its life and energy. That's, could you think about a greater galus than that? And therefore, therefore it's called Elihim Achedim, energies, which is Achedim, which is again about face. We see from about face Makadosh Baruch Hu. She Avodah Zarah mamash. It's true Avodah Zarah. What's Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah is about idolatry. What's idolatry? Idolatry is when you say idolatry, it's about an energy which doesn't want to recognize Hashem Echad, or doesn't want to recognize the oneness of Hashem. That's Avodah Zarah. So Avodah Zarah doesn't have to mean a stone that I bow down to. It's the idea that anything which doesn't identify with God is called Avodah Zarah. And everything is connected to God because we said again and again, nothing has independent energy. So everything in the world receives its energy from God. But to receive your energy from God and not to identify with a godly energy, that's Avodah Zarah. And it's kfir b'chdusah, it's denying in the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the oneness of Hashem, because the light and vitality of holiness is ultimately in a way of galus. It doesn't want to be there. It's concealed from this which it's vitalizing. Like we said before, you give something, you turn about face. In other words, the energy which you're giving is not with a personal touch, in a fashion, a manner, and therefore you are essentially disconnected from it. So the chayis, the life of chayis and kedusha, which goes in as a way of galus, and therefore it doesn't stand in subordinate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you know it's me, if you feel my energy, automatically, consequently, you will identify with my energy. If someone feels that it's receiving his energy from God, or let's say an example, we gave someone gives you a present with a smiling face, and he puts in a lot of passion into this present. So not only you look at the person, you feel indebted to the person. You feel close to the person. You always identify with the person, which is providing this to you. And therefore you'll never do anything against the other person. And this is when the person gives you a present to watch. But what if he gives you your entire parnasa, he gives you your house, he gives you your livelihood, you can receive a check from him every month for years? It's not you're indebted. Your whole mitzi is your whole being is completely stands with a constant subordinate to this person. And that's the similarity of the closeness of Kedusha in face of Kedusha of God. But when it comes to something which receives the energy, but the energy which it receives in a way of galus, so therefore it doesn't stand with any bittul, doesn't stand with any sense of subjugation, nullification to the Kedusha HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the face of the sanctity of God. But Adrab, on the contrary, Magbiat Makanesher, it elevates itself like an eagle. In other words, in the context of haughty, it becomes haughty, and it becomes egoistic, like an eagle, and it says, Ani b'afsiyed, it's all about me. So we'll stop over here, as it's 1:45, but I usually don't like to stop on Ani b'afsiyed. It's something which says, like Paris said, it's all about me, it's all about klipa, it's all about galus of the Shekhinah. But the good thing is that what we're going to get to, this is ultimately, we know the emes. The truth of the matter is that Eined Milvade, like we learned in the previous chapter. The truth of the matter is that's what's called Avodah Zarah. It's not it's something which is opposite than the real emes of Hashem Elikim Chaim Hu Elikim emes. And from the perspective of God, we said that Hashem Hu Elikim. As he concludes the chapter, which Bez Hashem will finish next week, in the end of the day, everything is constantly creating the Ayin Liyesh from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when we know the truth, we can understand how this is not aligned with our focus of the average Yid. In other words, because we ultimately understand that nothing else exists other than the emes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Have a wonderful night.